"If you can play piano, I'll marry you." The Black Widow laughed, then the rancher shocked everyone. The dusty streets of Gilt Edge buzzed with harvest festival preparations. Wooden storefronts displayed their finest goods, while townsfolk gathered in excited clusters. The arrival of something special had set the entire frontier town abuzz. Evelina Bynum stepped carefully through the general store, her black mourning dress rustling against the wooden shelves. Whispers followed her like shadows. 3 husbands buried in 5 years had earned her a reputation that clung tighter than prairie dust. The conversations hushed as she passed, then resumed in urgent undertones. "Cursed," "bad luck," "Black Widow." The words slithered through the air around her. Lucas McGraw pushed through the store's creaking door, his weathered hat in calloused hands. Unlike the others, he tipped his head respectfully toward Evie. She acknowledged him with the slightest nod. He was the only man in town who still treated her as human. Outside the saloon, Horace Prattle held court like a king addressing subjects. The former judge's voice carried across the dusty street as he pontificated about proper society and moral standards. His eyes found Evie through the store window and narrowed with obvious distaste. Clara Mee Whitaker stood at the edge of Horace's audience, her schoolteacher's keen eyes observing the social theater with growing frustration. She watched good people turn cruel when they gathered in groups. The crowd moved toward the town square where a gleaming piano sat like a monument to civilization. The mayor beamed with pride as he announced their newest acquisition. This instrument would prove Gilt Edge belonged among the refined settlements of the West. Horace stepped forward and placed his hand possessively on the piano's polished surface. He declared that certain people should know their place and not dare touch such a refined instrument. His gaze swept deliberately toward Evie. The crowd murmured agreement. Suggestions arose that maybe some folks should consider leaving town entirely. The cursed woman brought nothing but misfortune to decent people. Several men attempted to play the piano, each failing more spectacularly than the last. Their clumsy efforts produced discordant sounds that made children cover their ears. The crowd laughed at each attempt while maintaining their air of cultural superiority. The humiliation reached its breaking point. Horace loudly proclaimed this display as proof of divine justice. No one unsuitable would ever master such a noble instrument. Evie rose from where she sat on the general store's porch. Her voice cut through the crowd's chatter like a blade through silk. She issued her challenge with bitter sarcasm born from years of mistreatment. The crowd erupted in laughter at her words. Marriage to a piano player. What man in Gilt Edge possessed such refined skills? The gauntlet was thrown. Every person present understood what hung in the balance. Evie's dignity stood trial before the entire community. The crowd's laughter echoed across the town square as Evie's challenge hung in the air. Women covered their mouths while men slapped their knees in amusement. The idea of any man in Gilt Edge possessing real musical talent seemed absurd. Horace wiped tears from his eyes and gestured grandly toward the piano. He invited any brave soul to step forward and claim the Black Widow as his bride. His voice dripped with mockery as he promised entertainment for all. Several townsmen shuffled forward with exaggerated confidence. The blacksmith cracked his knuckles and attacked the keys with the same force he used on his anvil. The result sounded like cats fighting in a thunderstorm. The banker tried next, his soft hands producing weak, disconnected notes that bore no resemblance to music. His attempt lasted 30 seconds before he surrendered to the crowd's jeers. Each failure brought fresh waves of laughter. The piano became a stage for comedy rather than culture. Evie sat motionless on the porch, her face a mask of resigned dignity. Then Lucas McGraw stepped forward. The laughter doubled in volume. Here was the final act of this ridiculous show. A simple rancher who smelled of cattle and honest sweat would surely provide the greatest entertainment of all. Horace clapped his hands in delight. He proclaimed this the perfect ending to their little farce. The common laborer would demonstrate once and for all why refined pursuits belong to refined people. Lucas ignored the crowd's reaction. He walked steadily toward the piano, his boots clicking against the wooden platform. His weathered hands hung loose at his sides. Evie watched from her perch with a mixture of gratitude and dread. She appreciated his courage, but feared his inevitable failure would somehow become another mark against her cursed reputation. The crowd pressed closer, eager for the spectacle. Mothers lifted children onto their shoulders for better views. Even the saloon emptied as patrons spilled into the street. Lucas sat on the piano bench and adjusted his position. He flexed his fingers once, then placed them gently on the keys. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the comedy to begin. The first notes of Chopin's Minute Waltz floated across the town square. The laughter died instantly. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Children ceased their fidgeting. Even the horses seemed to listen. Lucas's calloused fingers moved with impossible grace across the ivory keys. Each note rang pure and true, building into cascades of melody that transformed the dusty frontier town into something magical. The technical precision was flawless. The emotional depth was breathtaking. This was not the fumbling of an amateur but the mastery of someone who had dedicated years to perfection. Horace's mouth fell open. His confident smirk dissolved into bewildered shock. This simple rancher was producing music that belonged in the finest concert halls of the East. Clara Mee pressed her hand to her heart, tears forming in her eyes. She had suspected there was more to Lucas McGraw than met the surface, but this revelation exceeded her wildest imagination. The music carried Lucas back through time and distance. St. Louis appeared in his memory like a half-remembered dream. Gas lamps lined cobblestone streets while carriages carried wealthy families to evening entertainments. Young Lucas sat at a different piano in a different life. His father stood beside him, a distinguished man with kind eyes and patient hands. Music filled their parlor every evening as father taught son the language that transcended words. James McGraw had been St. Louis's most sought-after piano instructor. Wealthy families competed for his attention, while their children struggled through scales and simple melodies. But his greatest joy was teaching his own son, who absorbed every lesson like parched earth drinking rain. The lessons continued for years. Father and son explored the works of masters, from Bach's mathematical precision to Chopin's emotional storms. Music became their shared sanctuary, a place where perfection was possible and beauty was guaranteed. Then came the scandal that destroyed everything. James had invested the family savings in a business venture recommended by a trusted friend. The friend proved to be a swindler who disappeared with hundreds of families' fortunes. Overnight, the McGraw name became associated with financial ruin. Former students abandoned their lessons. Friends crossed streets to avoid awkward conversations. The piano that had once brought joy became a reminder of loss. James grew ill from the stress and shame. His final words to his son were delivered with trembling hands resting on the piano keys. Music was the one treasure that could never be stolen, never be lost, never be diminished by others' failures. After his father's death, Lucas sold everything and headed west. The frontier offered anonymity and honest work that asked no questions about a man's past. He chose the identity of a simple rancher, burying his musical education beneath calluses and cattle dust. The final notes of the waltz rang across Gilt Edge like church bells announcing a miracle. Lucas lifted his hands from the keys and sat perfectly still, lost in memories of his father's proud smile. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Clara Mee began to applaud, her clapping echoing off the wooden buildings. Others joined slowly, uncertainly, as if afraid the spell might break. The applause built into a thunderous ovation that shook the very foundations of the town's assumptions. Lucas McGraw, the unremarkable rancher, had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about talent, education, and worth. The thunderous applause continued as Lucas rose from the piano bench. His weathered face remained calm despite the crowd's transformation from mockery to awe. Every person in Gilt Edge stared at him with newfound respect. Horace struggled to maintain his composure. His carefully constructed worldview had just crumbled beneath the weight of Lucas's unexpected mastery. The former judge cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the situation. The crowd turned expectantly toward Evie, anticipating her acceptance of the marriage proposal. According to her own challenge, she now owed Lucas her hand. Whispers rippled through the gathering about wedding arrangements and the strange turn of events. But Evie did not move from her position on the general store porch. Instead, she rose gracefully and walked toward the piano with measured steps. Her black mourning dress rustled softly against the wooden platform. She positioned herself beside the piano and placed one gloved hand on its polished surface. Her voice carried clearly across the suddenly quiet square as she spoke two simple words. The crowd gasped collectively. No one had expected this development. The Black Widow wanted to play the piano herself, the woman they had spent years avoiding and gossiping about. Horace sputtered objections. This was highly irregular and completely inappropriate. A woman of her questionable reputation had no business touching such a refined instrument, especially after such a masterful performance. Evie ignored his protests and settled onto the piano bench. She removed her black gloves deliberately, revealing slender fingers that bore the calluses of hard work but moved with surprising elegance. The crowd pressed closer despite their reservations. Curiosity overcame their prejudices as they wondered what sounds would emerge from the cursed woman's touch. Most expected embarrassment or failure. Evie positioned her hands above the keys with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She paused for one heartbeat, then began the opening notes of Beethoven's Für Elise. The melody flowed from her fingers like water from a natural spring. Each note was perfectly placed, every phrase shaped with artistic intention. But this was no simple rendition of a familiar piece. As the music progressed, Evie began incorporating variations that demonstrated deep understanding of classical composition. Her interpretation wove through complex harmonic progressions that would challenge professional musicians. The crowd stood transfixed as their assumptions shattered once again. This woman, whom they had dismissed and shunned, possessed musical abilities that surpassed even Lucas's impressive performance. Her technique was flawless, her artistry undeniable. Clara Mee felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She recognized the level of training required to achieve such mastery. Years of dedicated study and practice had created this moment of transcendent beauty. The music transported Evie to another time and place. New Orleans appeared in her memory with its wrought-iron balconies and gas-lit streets. The sounds and smells of the French Quarter surrounded her as she remembered her younger self. Little Evie had accompanied her mother to the grand house on Royal Street every Tuesday and Friday. Mama worked as a seamstress for the Dubois family, creating elegant gowns for society ladies who attended opera performances and charity balls. While Mama stitched in the sewing room, young Evie would sit quietly in the corner with her simple wooden doll. She tried to remain invisible, knowing that children should be seen and not heard in such refined surroundings. But Madame Dubois noticed everything. The French woman observed how little Evie's eyes followed her hands across the piano keys during afternoon practice sessions. She saw how the child's fingers moved silently, mimicking the positions required for each passage. One afternoon, Madame Dubois invited Evie to sit beside her on the piano bench. Her voice carried the musical accent of her homeland as she spoke about the universal language that knew no boundaries of birth or circumstance. The lessons began secretly. While Mama worked upstairs, Evie learned scales and simple melodies under Madame Dubois' patient guidance. The French woman possessed the rare gift of seeing potential where others saw only limitations. Years passed in this clandestine education. Evie progressed from simple children's songs to complex classical pieces. Madame Dubois pushed her student toward excellence, demanding precision and artistry in equal measure. The lessons continued until Evie's first marriage took her away from New Orleans. Her husband, a decent man who died in a logging accident, never knew about his wife's musical abilities. She feared such accomplishments would seem like putting on airs. Each subsequent marriage brought the same silence. Evie buried her talents beneath the practical concerns of frontier life. Cooking, cleaning, and surviving took precedence over artistic expression. But the music never left her. In quiet moments, her fingers would move across invisible keys, playing silent concerts for an audience of memories. Madame Dubois' lessons echoed through the years like beloved songs that refused to fade. Now, before the entire population of Gilt Edge, Evie allowed her true self to emerge. Her fingers danced across the keys with authority earned through years of dedicated practice. Every note proclaimed her refusal to be diminished by others' expectations. The final chord resonated across the town square like a declaration of independence. Evie lifted her hands from the keys and sat perfectly still, her head held high with quiet dignity. The silence stretched endlessly as the crowd processed what they had witnessed. Then Lucas began to clap, his weathered hands creating a steady rhythm of appreciation. Clara Mee joined him immediately, followed by others who recognized true artistry when they heard it. The applause built gradually but inevitably, washing over Evie like a long-awaited benediction. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. The applause gradually faded as the crowd waited for the obvious conclusion to unfold. According to Evie's own challenge, a marriage proposal should follow. Lucas had demonstrated his piano skills, earning the right to claim her hand before the entire town. But instead of accepting or discussing wedding arrangements, Evie and Lucas exchanged a meaningful look that spoke of deeper understanding. Their eyes held a knowledge that transcended the crowd's expectations and assumptions. Lucas stepped forward and addressed the gathering with quiet authority. His voice carried clearly across the square as he declared that both he and Miss Evie understood this moment had never been about marriage at all. Evie nodded in agreement, her posture straight and dignified. She stated simply that their demonstration had been about respect, something the town seemed to have forgotten how to give to those they deemed unworthy. The crowd murmured in confusion. They had witnessed two extraordinary musical performances and expected a romantic conclusion. Instead, they found themselves confronting uncomfortable truths about their own behavior and attitudes. Clara Mee watched with growing admiration as the two unlikely allies revealed their strategy. She had suspected there was more to this challenge than met the surface, but the depth of their planning impressed her. Evie explained that she and Lucas had spoken privately before the festival began. Both carried the burden of being underestimated and dismissed by people who judged worth based on appearance and circumstances rather than character. Their partnership had been strategic from the beginning. Two outsiders had recognized each other's hidden strengths and decided to support one another against the prejudices they faced daily in Gilt Edge. Lucas confirmed that their collaboration aimed to prove a simple but powerful point. Talent, education, and refinement existed in unexpected places, often hidden beneath surfaces that society chose to overlook or dismiss. The crowd shifted uncomfortably as the implications became clear. They had spent years treating both Lucas and Evie as lesser beings, never bothering to look beyond their assumptions and preconceptions. Horace's face reddened with humiliation and rage. His authority had been systematically dismantled by two people he considered beneath his notice. The carefully constructed social order that elevated him above others was crumbling. He stepped forward and attempted to regain control by dismissing their performances as mere tricks and showing off. Real refinement, he declared, was about knowing one's proper place in society, not displaying inappropriate skills. Horace argued that their musical abilities, while surprising, did not change the fundamental facts of their stations in life. A rancher remained a rancher, and a cursed woman remained cursed, regardless of hidden talents. His words carried the desperation of someone watching his worldview collapse. The former judge had built his identity on being superior to those around him, and these revelations threatened that foundation. Several townspeople nodded in agreement with Horace's assessment. Change was uncomfortable, and it was easier to dismiss what they had witnessed than to examine their own prejudices and mistakes. But Clara Mee had heard enough. The schoolteacher stepped forward with the calm determination of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. She reached into her leather satchel and withdrew a bundle of papers tied with string. Her voice carried the authority of education and moral certainty as she addressed the crowd. The letters in her possession, she announced, contained proof of systematic theft and corruption that would shock the community to its core. For months, she had been gathering evidence of financial crimes committed by their self-appointed moral authority. Horace's face went pale as Clara Mee began reading from the correspondence. The documents revealed his embezzlement of funds designated for town improvements and community programs. Money donated specifically for a new school roof had disappeared into Horace's personal accounts. Funds meant to repair the church bell tower had been diverted to pay his gambling debts in the next county. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Clara Mee had meticulously documented every transaction, every forged signature, every falsified record that Horace had created to cover his crimes. The crowd's attention shifted entirely from the piano performances to this new revelation. Their moral leader, the man who had lectured them about proper behavior and social standards, was a common thief. Horace sputtered denials and accusations, claiming the documents were forgeries designed to discredit him. But Clara Mee's reputation for honesty and thoroughness made her evidence impossible to dismiss. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The man who had spent years judging others based on their circumstances had been stealing from his own community while maintaining his facade of respectability. Several townspeople began voicing their anger at being deceived and robbed. The same crowd that had mocked Lucas and shunned Evie now turned their fury toward Horace with righteous indignation. Clara Mee continued reading, revealing that Horace had also been spreading malicious gossip designed to maintain his position as the town's moral arbiter. He had actively worked to keep people divided and suspicious of each other. The full scope of his manipulation became clear. By keeping the community focused on judging and excluding others, Horace had diverted attention from his own crimes and maintained his undeserved authority. Lucas and Evie watched as the crowd's anger shifted toward its proper target. Their strategic alliance had accomplished more than they had dared hope, exposing not just prejudice but actual corruption. The piano sat silently on its platform, no longer a symbol of division but a catalyst for truth. Two hidden talents had been revealed, but more importantly, a hidden cancer had been exposed and could finally be removed. Justice was beginning to take shape, not through violence or revenge, but through the power of truth spoken with dignity and courage. The crowd's anger toward Horace reached a boiling point as Clara Mee finished reading the damning evidence. Voices rose in outrage as people calculated how much money had been stolen from projects that could have improved their lives. The blacksmith remembered donating his hard-earned savings for new school desks that never arrived. The baker recalled contributing to a community well that was never dug. Every family had given something that Horace had pocketed. Horace backed away from the advancing crowd, his face pale and sweat beading on his forehead. His protests grew weaker as more people began sharing their own suspicions about missing funds and delayed projects. The sheriff, who had been listening from the edge of the crowd, stepped forward with grim determination. He had suspected something was wrong with the town's finances, but lacked the evidence to act until now. Clara Mee handed over the complete collection of documents, explaining how she had discovered the first irregularities while helping with the school's budget. Her investigation had taken months of careful work to uncover the full extent of the theft. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged receipts, and correspondence with gambling establishments painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning several years. Horace's respectable facade had hidden the activities of a common criminal. As the sheriff led Horace away, The former judge's departure created a vacuum in the town's power structure. For years, people had deferred to his authority and allowed him to shape their opinions about right and wrong. Without his manipulative influence, the crowd began to see their recent behavior in a different light. They had mocked and excluded two talented individuals based on nothing more than superficial judgments and gossip. Clara Me seized the moment to propose practical solutions that could transform their community. She suggested that both Lucas and Evie be invited to teach music lessons to the children, giving them productive roles that utilized their remarkable abilities. The idea gained immediate support from parents who recognized the value of musical education. Their children could learn from masters who had proven their skills before the entire town. The piano, which had served as a symbol of division and exclusion, could become an instrument of unity and growth. Regular concerts and lessons would bring people together rather than driving them apart. Several townspeople approached Lucas and Evie with sincere apologies for their past treatment. The banker who had failed so miserably at the piano offered to help establish a proper music school with adequate funding. The mayor, embarrassed by his association with Horace's corruption, promised full community support for any cultural programs Lucas and Evie wished to develop. The town's reputation needed rebuilding, and their talents could lead that effort. Evie accepted the apologies with grace, though years of mistreatment had left deep wounds that would take time to heal. She agreed to consider teaching, recognizing the opportunity to use her abilities for meaningful purpose. Lucas nodded his acceptance as well, seeing the chance to honor his father's memory by passing musical knowledge to a new generation. The lessons James McGraw had taught about music being unbreakable treasure could live on through other students. Clara Me outlined her vision for Gilt Edge's transformation. The community could become known for its cultural offerings rather than its prejudices and corruption. Music, education, and genuine refinement could flourish with proper support. The crowd responded enthusiastically to her proposals. People began volunteering their time and resources to support the new initiatives. The carpenter offered to build proper music stands, while the seamstress promised to create concert attire. Within hours, the entire social dynamic of Gilt Edge had shifted dramatically. The revelation of hidden talents and corruption had forced everyone to examine their assumptions and values. Young people who had felt trapped by the town's narrow-mindedness now saw possibilities for growth and learning. Parents recognized that their children could receive education they had never dreamed possible. The elderly residents, many of whom had lived through harder times, appreciated the chance to witness genuine culture and refinement. Music could provide beauty and meaning that enriched their daily lives. As evening approached, spontaneous planning sessions began throughout the town. Groups gathered to discuss schedules for lessons, fundraising for instruments, and arrangements for regular performances. The general store owner offered space for sheet music and supplies. The saloon keeper suggested converting his back room into a practice space for students. Even the undertaker volunteered to help transport a larger piano if one could be acquired. Evie found herself surrounded by children who begged for the chance to learn piano. Their innocent enthusiasm began healing wounds that years of adult cruelty had created. She saw possibility where she had once seen only rejection. Lucas discovered that several adults were also interested in lessons. Men who had failed embarrassingly at the piano earlier now humbly requested the chance to learn properly under his guidance. The transformation extended beyond music to other areas of community life. People began questioning other assumptions and prejudices they had accepted without examination. Clara Me's courage in exposing corruption inspired others to demand higher standards. Local businesses committed to greater transparency in their dealings. The new sheriff promised regular financial audits to prevent future embezzlement. Citizens organized committees to oversee community projects and ensure proper use of funds. As the sun set over Gilt Edge, The town bore little resemblance to the narrow-minded settlement it had been that morning. Hidden talents had been revealed, corruption had been exposed, and new possibilities had been born. The piano stood silently in the gathering dusk, waiting to begin its true purpose as an instrument of education, beauty, and community unity. 6 months had transformed Gilt Edge from a town divided by prejudice into a community united by possibility. The autumn air carried the sound of piano music from the converted schoolhouse where Evie and Lucas conducted their daily lessons. Children of all backgrounds gathered each afternoon, their eager faces reflecting the joy of discovery. The banker's daughter sat beside the blacksmith's son, both struggling through the same simple melody with equal determination and encouragement. Evie had traded her perpetual mourning clothes for practical teaching attire in soft blues and grays. Her patient guidance helped young fingers find their way across the keys, while her gentle corrections built confidence rather than fear. Lucas worked with the adult students in the evening hours, understanding that grown men needed different encouragement than children. His weathered hands demonstrated techniques, while his calm voice reminded them that learning was a journey without shortcuts. The old piano had been joined by two smaller instruments donated by neighboring towns who had heard about Gilt Edge's cultural renaissance. Music filled spaces that had once echoed with gossip and judgment. Clara Mee stood at the schoolhouse window, watching her vision come to life with deep satisfaction. The transformation exceeded even her most optimistic expectations, proving that communities could change when given proper leadership and inspiration. The evening concert had become Gilt Edge's most anticipated weekly event. Families gathered in the schoolhouse to hear their children perform pieces they had learned, celebrating progress rather than demanding perfection. Tonight's program featured a special performance that had taken weeks to prepare. Evie and Lucas had agreed to play a duet that would demonstrate the power of collaboration and mutual respect. The audience filled every available seat while late arrivals stood along the walls. Former skeptics now served as the music program's most enthusiastic supporters, having discovered that culture enriched rather than threatened their way of life. Young Timothy, the banker's son, opened the program with a careful rendition of a simple folk tune. His concentrated expression and deliberate finger placement earned warm applause from an audience that had learned to value effort over expertise. Sarah, the blacksmith's daughter, followed with a more ambitious piece that showcased months of dedicated practice. Her confident performance demonstrated how proper instruction could unlock potential that might otherwise remain hidden forever. One by one, students of various ages shared their musical progress. Some performances were technically flawless while others showed room for improvement, but each received equal encouragement and appreciation from the supportive community. The adult students presented their pieces with nervous pride, proving that learning had no age limits. The barber's careful waltz and the shopkeeper's folk dance showed that dignity came from trying rather than from natural talent alone. Finally, Evie and Lucas took their places at the two pianos for the evening's featured performance. They had chosen a piece that required precise coordination and mutual trust, symbolizing the partnership that had changed their town. The duet began with Lucas establishing a steady foundation, while Evie added intricate melodies that wove through his solid framework. Their musical conversation demonstrated how different strengths could complement each other perfectly. The audience listened in reverent silence as the two instruments created harmonies that neither could achieve alone. The music told the story of their journey from isolation to acceptance, from judgment to understanding. As the final notes faded, the applause began immediately and continued for several minutes. This was more than appreciation for musical skill. It was gratitude for the transformation these two individuals had brought to their community. After the concert, people lingered to discuss future plans and share their excitement about upcoming performances. The social gathering that followed each concert had become as important as the music itself. Evie found herself surrounded by parents expressing gratitude for their children's musical education. Former adversaries now spoke to her with genuine respect and affection, relationships built on shared purpose rather than superficial judgments. Lucas accepted congratulations from men who had once dismissed him as a simple rancher. His integration of past musical training with present practical skills had created a more complete and confident version of himself. The music school had become profitable enough to support both teachers comfortably, while providing scholarships for families who could not afford lessons. Success had grown from community investment rather than individual ambition. Beyond the immediate musical achievements, the program had fostered broader changes in how Gilt Edge approached differences and challenges. Problems were now met with curiosity rather than suspicion, and solutions emerged through collaboration rather than exclusion. The corruption scandal had led to permanent reforms in how the town managed its finances and made decisions. Transparency and accountability had replaced the old system of deference to unquestioned authority. New businesses had arrived, drawn by reports of Gilt Edge's cultural offerings and progressive attitudes. The town's reputation had shifted from a rough frontier settlement to a community that valued education and refinement. As the evening wound down, Evie and Lucas cleaned and covered the pianos with the satisfaction of work well done. Their unlikely partnership had achieved far more than either had dared imagine during those difficult early days. The schoolhouse fell quiet except for the distant sounds of families walking home through streets now filled with hope rather than division. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that talent and worth came in unexpected packages. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.